The Kinahan family has reached stardom for all the wrong reasons. This crime family has been involved in drug smuggling, murder, money laundering, and so much more. Currently, there's a podcast on Apple Podcasts titled Kinahans, and it rose to the top of the charts as soon as it was released a few days ago. It's a 9-part series that tells the story of the crime family that rose so much in popularity. Some are comparing them to Escobar's legacy, from being intertwined with professional boxers like Tyson Fury to having politicians in their back pocket. The Kinahan family knows no bounds. However, it all started with one man, Christopher Vincent Kinahan Sr. In the 80s, Russia invaded Afghanistan, and as a result, a lot of heroin found its way to Europe. The UK, along with other EU countries, encountered a lot of problems. The family that made excessive amounts of money from the influx of drugs had nothing to do with the Kinahan family. The Dunn family, led by the patriarchal Larry Dunn and his brother Christy, built a name for themselves in Dublin's underworld. They were known for their bank robberies. However, security was getting tighter and tighter, so normal criminals like the Dunns would find it harder and harder to rob banks. That's when Larry Dunn got introduced to heroin, so he decided to be the first one to bring it to Ireland. Larry, along with Michael and Shamey, made up the core of the Dunn family. Practically overnight, these gangs had access to cheap heroin, and they did what any money-hungry crime lord would do: flood the city with this stuff. The three brothers made a fortune smashing that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, they made a fortune selling cheap drugs to working-class citizens. Despite all of the money they were making, Larry didn't want to expose himself and always kept a low profile. He liked to run things from the background. The Irish Gardaí weren't ready to face the problems that this wave of drugs would bring to the state. So while the Gardaí were busy fighting the IRA, the heroin epidemic was spreading faster than the plague. To make matters worse, these drug lords and drug dealers would give the substance to children on the street. They would unscrupulously and ruthlessly get children hooked on the drug. When compared to the low-income neighborhoods in the US, Ireland's poverty-stricken youth had more children between the ages of 15 and 17 hooked on the drug. As the drug epidemic worsened, the parents took matters into their own hands and formed the Concerned Parents Against Drugs. All sorts of families would join the marches, bringing shame to drug dealers. Politicians, IRA members, and regular people would march side by side. But one family was also present: the HUTCHes. At one of the meetings, Larry Dunn appeared, took center stage, and tried to convince people that the Dunns were trading just like any other hard-working family in Ireland. One of the men stood up and told Larry that while others were dealing in goods, he was dealing in death. And they were right. At the top of their game, the Dunns controlled around 95% of the heroin trade in Ireland. However, the people kept working tirelessly to bring Dunn to justice. In 1983, they finally succeeded. Larry Dunn was finally put in prison for drug trafficking. During the trial, Larry Dunn was convicted of 14 years imprisonment. But during the trial, he said something that people still remember 40 years later. He said, "You think I am bad? You want to see what's coming behind me?" As the years rolled by, Dunn's words never rang truer. People thought the problem would go if they smashed the dragon's head. But this was no dragon. It was a hydra. When law enforcement sliced one head, 2 new ones would pop up. So with the fall of the Dunn family, the Kinahan family began their ascent. Christy Kinahan was born in 1957 in London, around 20 years before anyone in Ireland knew what heroin was. Raised by Daniel and Mary in a middle-class home, along with his 2 sisters, Christy had a comfortable childhood. But when Christy was still a child, Daniel and Mary decided to move back to Dublin, their native city. Although Christy got expelled from one school, his family managed to get him admitted to another less prestigious, but still renowned school. Christy was falling behind once again. He was not an A student. When he left school, his prospects of making it in the corporate world were slim. But Christy Kinahan fell in love with Jean Boylan. When he was just 20 years old in 1977, the couple had their first son, Daniel. At the age of 22, Christy got another child and named him Christy Jr. At the age of 22, Christy had to feed a family of 4. He was working hard and earning an honest man's living. He was a cab driver and worked long hours, but he could never make ends meet. The prospect of quick cash seemed very appealing to a man who couldn't feed his family. In the beginning, as a young man hungry for more, Christy Kinahan would take part in petty crimes. This included robbing cars and burglaries. Later, Christy found out about check fraud. He didn't find out that they exist. Christy found out that he was really good at them. So all of these low-level crimes helped him pay the bills and bring food to the table. Larry Dunn, the leader of the Irish underworld, was driving around town in a white limo. His children went to private schools, and his family was always eating out in expensive restaurants. All of that from a new business that started in the 80s. Christy Kinahan wanted a slice of the good life. Christy Kinahan got in the game, establishing a supply network for the Dunns. He remained in the background and made vast profits. The one thing that Christy made sure to do was to smash that subscribe button, just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, seriously now, he made sure to build his list of contacts. These contacts had one thing in common. They all moved him up the power hierarchy. Christy's wealth, power, and influence kept growing. When Larry Dunn went under, he kept the trade going. Just a year later, Christy and his network of dealers helped him become the biggest supplier of heroin in Ireland. The biggest advantage Christy had over other drug lords was his anonymity. The Gardaí had no idea who he was, and this helped him build the billion-dollar empire we know today. While most drug lords were going for penthouses in the city center, Christy rented an apartment in a neighborhood of hardworking middle-class citizens. He wanted to project an image of an English businessman. He adopted an English accent, not for him since he was brought up in London, and he remained in the background. He knew that big money was made in distribution. The apartment was used as a hub or a drop-a place where the heroin was stored. After that, he distributed the drugs to the local dealers. As his influence grew, someone tipped the Gardaí. The police got a warrant to search his place and knocked on his door. An Algerian man opened the door. The police showed him the warrant, and the man was forced to let them in. On the couch in the living room, Christy was eating a ham and cheese sandwich. On the small coffee table in the center was a pile of brown powder. 117 Irish pounds worth of heroin were on the coffee table. When Kinahan saw the police, his face went pale. He didn't try to shift the blame. Kinahan didn't talk much because he knew he was caught red-handed. The bust happened in 1986, and in 1987, he was facing a trial. During the trial, he blamed the Algerian man for dealing the heroin, while he was nothing more than an addict. The court gobbled up this bogus story, and instead of giving him 10 years, Kinahan served a relatively short sentence, 6 years behind bars. While in prison, he served a full 6-year jail sentence. Reportedly, Kinahan studied for 2 degrees and even refused to be released early. Some accounts say he learned to speak Spanish and Russian while in prison, and when he got out, it was finally time to break even with those who wronged him. After eliminating all of the snitches, he was ready to implement the second phase of his strategy, introducing his sons to the business. Daniel and Christopher Jr. took over their operations while he remained in the background, growing the business and advising his sons. He liked the hands-off approach ever since the days of Larry Dunn, and he's kept it to this day. Bye for now.